Welcome to the Tradies in Business podcast. Join your host, Nicole Cox, as she dives into the real stories, tips, secrets, and stuff-ups from guests both inside and outside the trade world. Nick is here to help you break free from the grind, reduce money stress, and build a trade business that truly works for you. So grab a brew, put your phone on silent, and get ready to be inspired.
Hi, listeners, and welcome back to Tradies in Business. I have another guest interview today, and it's something that really jumped out at me as a topic that I think many of you as trade business owners need to be thinking about, if not talking about or exploring. Today, we're going to be talking about the superpower that can be ADHD and how it shows up for so many of the business owners that we work with here at Tradies in Business. But not only the business owners, also the team. I have a wonderful guest with me today, Skye Waterson. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Skye, can you tell us a little bit about, well, firstly, how did you come to be working in this space?
Yeah, so it was a surprise for me. I went through sort of a very up and down, tumultuous academic career of, burnout and then getting back on the horse. But I found myself at my PhD getting diagnosed with ADHD, which was really a surprise. And it threw me into doing a lot of research into how ADHD works, trying to figure out my own brain and building some strategies that I have taught for, about 5 years now to professionals. And over that time, I've obviously built my own business. I was building businesses with my husband before and really fallen in love with it. And now I focus working with business owners to help them grow their businesses without the chaos that can often be that ADHD brain.
It's an amazing brain that is the ADHD brain. I can say that, well, I've shared before, there's a large part of our community that have either recently been diagnosed or are on the path of being diagnosed at the moment with ADHD. And what I find is they just think in a way that is so unique and so incredible and can create chaos. I think your word was absolutely perfect. Skye, how is it that you were first diagnosed? So there'd be a lot of people on listening to the episode that would be thinking, okay, well, I've had thoughts about this for myself, but I don't really understand what it is, and I don't understand at what point I should be looking to get a diagnosis. So perhaps you could share
Yeah.
with us maybe your own experience and then typically what you see.
Yeah, so typically it's it's a persistent and pervasive struggle. That's the key. It's not just on Friday afternoons I struggle a little bit. I struggle at home, I struggle at work, I struggled when I was a kid, I struggle now. So we're seeing things across time and across different areas. And for myself, what it really was that I had that spiky profile that you often see with people who have ADHD. Yes, I was very creative. Yes, I had a lot of ideas, but the follow through was a real struggle. And what I ended up doing and what we can sometimes find ourselves doing is pushing through, like hitting that wall and pushing through. But then that led to burnout because I wasn't doing it in a way that felt good for my brain. So the options were kind of work really hard and burn out, or fail to work really hard and not achieve. And so when I started my PhD, I knew something was wrong and I had to figure it out. I went to my university's learning center. I asked them to test me, and then they came back with ADHD, which was a big surprise. But looking back, it explained so many things about my life. And, at that time I was running a business part-time with my boyfriend, now husband at the time. And I was really developing an interest in business because of it's a really great place for people with ADHD. When you learn, you find that people with ADHD are more likely, in some cases, like double more likely to go into entrepreneurial spaces, to want to act on all those original creative ideas. But without the backup, it can end up in the same space, burnout or just, self-sabotage.
I see a lot of frustration. So thinking about the people, and I'll talk only about my direct experience that I know is correct rather than the assumption that lots of people that we work with may have ADHD. Because I actually think that's probably something we should talk about too. There's a lot of self-diagnosed people, if you like. I'm doing air quotes that nobody that's listening can see. And I think there is a real opportunity to find out for yourself, like, is this a pattern? Is this something that I need to work on? Is it an
Mhm.
area of opportunity? Because I don't think it's something that carries the confusion and perhaps shame that it did some years ago.
Yeah.
And thinking then generally about the people that I work with, there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of they don't understand themselves.
Mhm.
They know they have these amazing ideas. They don't know how to act on it, or they get so chaotic that the follow through, as you explained, doesn't quite happen. So I guess there's a couple questions in that statement. One, how important is it to be diagnosed and to be sure this is what you're dealing with? And then two, once we've had that diagnosis, where do we go from there?
Yeah, the diagnosis one is an interesting one. I personally, you know, recommend you get diagnosed if you want to get diagnosed, but I do know people who don't want to get diagnosed, and that's a personal journey. It's also expensive and it could take a long time. Um, but I think it's really important for you to know to be very confident in what you have, because if you don't get diagnosed, there is a chance that you don't have ADHD and you in fact have some kind of autism combo or a mental health disorder, and that you're not actually treating the thing that you're supposed to be treating. So that's the reason I would say for getting a diagnosis, and obviously medication, and that's up to you. But when it comes to what I teach, it's really about building systems that flow and feel natural for your brain. So, about 50% of the people that I work with aren't diagnosed or on kind of the diagnosis journey. They're waiting for a psychiatrist, that kind of thing. And for them, it's really about going, oh, when I do it like this, it feels good. It feels natural. My day doesn't start and end with me just hitting refresh on my email and kind of being in this paralyzed state. While everything is on fire around me, I'm actually getting things done. I'm building momentum. I'm happy. I can close my books at the end of the day and go see my family. And that is such a, 180 shift for so many people.
Mm. I guess it can be really confronting for many people to think, well, this is just the way I am. And I do believe that the schooling system, I'm not sure about where you're based in New Zealand, but certainly in Australia, in my experience, the schooling system is meant for a particular type of learner, and it can make it very challenging. We feel like something's wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
I wonder then, thinking about the systems and the structure that you teach and you demonstrate for the people that you work with, the massive shift that it has for them so that they can be more effective in what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And perhaps effective isn't even the right word. Perhaps effective leaves a connotation that they're ineffective ordinarily. There are just, I think, different ways for us to work. So once you're teaching that framework and they're following that framework, Sky, how do you find that it impacts their lives? So clearly, no, I'm not going to answer. I'll just leave it with.
Well, I think the biggest impact. So the first thing that I teach people is I teach them how to focus themselves, how to actually do things that they want to do, which sounds strange, but if you're ADHD, you totally get it. And then how to organize their teams and then how to organize their revenue. That's kind of the cycle that we go in. I teach 3 systems, 6 routines, so it's not endless. It's like a couple of things you go into really deeply. And usually, what I see in the first 2 weeks is that people end up in a position where they are really starting to understand what is truly urgent, what is truly important for them to do that day. Actually, I have something I can give it to you. If you DM me on Instagram at Unconventional Organization, you can DM me Tradie, and then I will give it to you. And it's basically a 2-minute focus formula that I have to help people who have this struggle, because so often the first thing that people come to me for is everything's on fire, everything's overwhelming. I'm trying to run a business and I just feel like the business is running me. And that is the first thing that, we want to break down.
Mhm. So where to from there? Once we start to work on some of these systems and structure, what does it change for us on a day-to-day basis? And then how does that help us take more satisfaction from what we're doing?
Mhm. Yeah. Honestly, it changes a lot. So if you can imagine, you come into the office, you walk into wherever your space is, you don't not do the thing. You know what you need to do. You're very focused on the most urgent things you have to do, the important things that are going to move the needle. You aren't just constantly in, reactive mode. You know how to go from, I don't want to do something, to doing it in about 15 minutes. You can get those big tasks ticked off. You know how to delegate. You know how to hire. You know how to see the ins and outs of your business really simply, so that you're not saying, oh, a systems and processes doc. Sure, we have one, I think, like I hope. And you're then able to, build momentum, have a day where you're like, I did the things that I needed to do. I built some momentum. I gave my team what they needed to do. I'm running the team, or I'm hiring people to run the team. I know how to do this now. And then you're ending your day, hopefully with more revenue, because that's kind of how that works once you do all those pieces. And you're going to see your family, and you're not distracted by work. But also, I do teach, systems that help you stay more focused in general, so they work with families as well. And I've worked with a lot of people who've said that.
That's fascinating. So, as somebody who doesn't understand the lived experience of having ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
feel like for somebody? So, perhaps we could talk. So, a listener is unsure. They just know that
Mm-hmm.
life feels chaotic and a bit crazy. What does
Mm-hmm.
it feel like? What are some of the typical characteristics that would perhaps suggest that we need to look further into this for ourselves?
Yeah, this is a great one. So, have you ever been tired? Like, have you ever been, you woken up and a little bit tired, just everything's a little bit slower?
Yep.
And then have you ever had coffee and you drank a little bit too much coffee to solve the problem?
Every time, yeah.
So now you're kind of tired, but you're also kind of distracted and
Yep.
a bit jangly. Yeah, that's probably the closest way I can describe the feeling of having ADHD. Not all the time. Sometimes it switches and now you're in flow. Everything feels amazing. As long as you keep doing this thing, you're on top of the world. You've got that one perfect hour. You're totally going to get everything done. It doesn't happen like that, but that's the feeling. Um, and so you sort of switch between those two modes most of the time.
hmm And it's like that in every area of your life. It's not just a work thing or just not just a home thing.
Yeah, it's pretty much in every area of your life. Like some people will have, so I will say some people will have like an area of their like where they naturally go into hyperfocus. So they'll find they're pretty good in one area, but they struggle in all of the other areas.
Mhm.
But one of the things that can happen, especially if you have a day which is the opposite of what I just described, you come in. Yeah, I've talked to tradies before who say I come in, there's a ton of phone calls, a ton of emails. I haven't responded to them. I hired an admin maybe half a year ago. It was a nightmare. I don't have one anymore. I feel paralyzed. I don't really do anything. And then that's the end of my day. That can kind of feel like how it is. I respond to one or two really on fire things, or maybe not even the ones that are important. And then I go home probably a bit late and I'm really tired and I'm really exhausted. And people can crash out at that point and they just want to lie on the couch, zone out, not think about work, or maybe they're sneaking back onto the computer to try and get that one or two things done because they didn't do it during the day. And then their partner's like, why didn't you do it during the day? You had all day. And they're like, that is true. And I didn't use the time effectively. And so it can really spiral in that way into home and work life.
Mm. So, Sky, then using the framework that you're able to teach and share with your clients,
Mm-hmm.
how does it shift? So it goes from chaos. Clearly, we create a better version of flow,
Mm-hmm.
but how does it actually work?
Yeah, I'd love to share it. So, I love to share this stuff. So, basically, the first thing I would say is, okay, we want to get focused. We want to understand what is truly urgent and what is truly important. So, the first thing that I ask people to do is I ask them to grab a digital or physical piece of paper somewhere that they're gonna come back to multiple times. Um, and they want to go ahead and just write down everything, every single task that is in their head. So, not the emails, not the others that you've discarded, like just what is in your head. People will sometimes take, 5 minutes. It's surprising how much stuff we keep in our head. ADHD, we struggle with working memory, right? So, we're pulling that out right at the beginning, giving you that wonderful brain space to do that creative thinking and problem solving. And then from there, I ask you to go through and I say, okay, what has to happen in the next 24 hours, or there will be a significant external negative consequence? Something very bad will happen. And the way I always describe it is, heaven forbid you were in a waiting room for some situation, and your day was just completely, gone. What is the thing that you would be either having to do despite the situation or having to message about because you weren't going to be able to do it. The payment, the plan for tomorrow, that's the stuff that is truly urgent. Nothing else is truly urgent. So we want to identify those things. Most people have less than 5. Some people have none. And then we want to go, okay, well, what about the rest of these things? What are the 1 to maximum 3 things on the list that are going to really move your business forward if you did them? The important but not urgent things, the hiring, the process system, updating the website with something, whatever it is for you. Let's go ahead and highlight those. And then what we do is we block time for the important stuff and we do the urgent stuff, get it done, get it away, and we ignore everything else. And that's the process that I recommend people go through as a prioritization filter. Like I said, I have a free sort of get started system that you guys can do, because I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed. It's a horrible, horrible feeling. And then from there, I teach people, okay, cool, now I know what to do, but I don't want to do it. And then I teach them the process of how to step into focus and do things, again, based on how our brain works and what feels natural for us.
Mm. I see there's a lot of differences in our community about time blocking. So you've just mentioned about blocking out time to do some of those important, non-urgent things. And so I find there's kind of people that can sit and be focused. And I'm talking about administration time here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So they've blocked out some time to sit down and work through their emails, or they've blocked out some time to sit down and work on a strategy for their business to improve it. But we all work so differently in that time block. Is there a particular rhythm that you see with the people that you work with that works best for them?
So I teach a particular rhythm, the step into focus routine that I just mentioned. So the very first thing I recommend you do is I actually recommend you give yourself a reward for starting. So this is very unusual, but it's based on the dopamine transfer deficit theory. We seem to find that people who have ADHD don't get as much dopamine when they start a task as people who don't have ADHD. So, other people might be like, oh, this is going to be amazing when it's done. I'll feel so good. And their brain just lights up and gives them all that stuff. Our brain just goes, this sucks. This is boring. Why are we doing this? And so we need to kind of give yourself a reward for starting. So it has to be at your desk or wherever you're going to work. Grabbing a nice drink, maybe reading an article, like doing something nice, making that the first step. And then from there we go in and we go, okay, what is, let's turn off some of the distractions. Let's turn down the dial a little bit. Maybe we'll switch to a podcast or background music or background TV or whatever it is for you. And then we write down on a tiny little Post-it note exactly what we're going to do, like a recipe. We want to write it down like a recipe to support your working memory. And then from there, I just recommend people open the application and, play around in it. No pressure, not yet, but we're just, writing some notes, having a think, maybe highlighting some stuff. And then at that point, you know what you're going to do. You've opened the application, you've turned off distractions, you've given yourself a reward, and inertia tends to go the other way.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. So you've mentioned working memory. And I'm wondering if it's the part around working memory that means that I see pretty consistently that our members that have been diagnosed with ADHD struggle with communicating to their team or their clients. In fact, in some of the businesses I work with, we have little code names for the way the tradie typically communicates. I won't share any of them because I'll be out in some. But there's a specific way that they speak that means that once you're attuned to it and you're part of their team, you can understand it. But I'm wondering, what is it that means that communication is a struggle for many of our ADHD business owners?
Yeah. So working memory and communication, I think the number one thing is just if somebody says, hey, can you remember to this? And the person goes, yeah, that's not happening. That's already gone. That was gone by the time the next word was said. So there needs to be a home for it. And I teach this process, like where to put it, how to make sure you keep up with it. Like it's all in the program, but it's really important that those things get captured, because if they don't get captured, they will get missed. Yeah, that's the number one thing I would say about working memory and communication is just remembering that you remembered. Like working memory can be so bad that some people have gotten diagnosed with ADHD because they thought that they had early stage dementia and they had to get tested for that, and they found out they had ADHD instead. So it can be very a real big struggle in a lot of people, especially because it gets worse when you're overwhelmed.
Yeah, most definitely. There's a lot on your plate. It's very hard.
Mm-hmm.
So, thinking about then this from a different perspective, because many of our listeners are also employers and they may
Mm-hmm.
have employees that have
Mm-hmm.
ADHD or something
Yeah.
similar. And so I'm wondering then, communicating to them, so giving them a task to do, it sounds as
Mm-hmm.
though that could be very challenging for them to complete because of the working memory capacity.
Yeah.
Is there
Mm-hmm.
a best way to communicate to our team to ensure that they're able to hear what we need them to
Mm-hmm.
work on?
Yeah. Yeah. So what I recommend, what I teach is something a little bit unusual, which is basically called an SOP pipeline. So we build a visual model, a pipeline, if you will, of your business. We understand, we can see who's responsible, very, very important. Who's responsible for what color is that pipeline, and where is the SOP linked to that pipeline? That way we can go through, and I teach, I teach entrepreneurs like weekly cadences and one-on-ones, and how to do them and how not to do them and things like that. We can go through and we can make sure that that person is responsible and that person is able to say, what they're doing. But also at the same time, we're not throwing a million tiny little tasks at them that have no bearing. Because sometimes the person who's running the business as well might be throwing things at them that have nothing to do with their
Mm.
pipeline and what they're responsible for. And that becomes a conversation as well.
So, is it possible for somebody with ADHD to instruct somebody that also has ADHD? Do they speak in the same language, or does it
Well, I
actually
hope so,
messy?
because that's what I do. um, yes, yeah, 100%. I mean, it can be if they have the strategy. So, you mentioned the idea of superpower at the beginning. ADHD is a huge strength, especially in entrepreneurship, but it can also be a huge weakness
Mhm.
if it doesn't have the systems and strategies built in. And the people who really feel that the most are often the family and the people in the workplace. The person who's running it might be like, "Oh, I have ADHD, but I don't think it affects me," and then everyone in the background is rolling their eyes. Like that happens all the time. So
Yes.
yes, if they have the systems and strategies in place and they are working on them.
Mm. Do we have to, typically, well, even from my position as a business coach, the way we work with clients is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of the big problems with schooling is we're all expected to learn the same way. The
Mm-hmm.
way we work with our clients is with a lot of this in mind, knowing that it can
Mm-hmm.
be too much for them. So we have, we will communicate with them on three different levels so that they have the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to attach and understand at any particular time. But I'm going to assume, and I'd love you to fact check this with me, Sky, that there would be no common denominator on the way somebody, just because they have ADHD, that they then communicate. So we can't communicate en masse to everybody with ADHD in the community in the same way.
Well, it's a good question. Everybody is obviously really different.
Hmm.
But when you look at the research, like we do communicate very, very similarly to the point where, AI, there's a paper, a very interesting paper that came out recently that they're using AI to understand people's language, like listen to language and use that to do a pre-diagnostic of ADHD because people with ADHD are communicating so similarly, interrupting, kind of going from point A to point D. There's a couple of different ways of communicating that are very similar. So at that level, like, no, it can be very, very similar. If you're talking about different ways of attaching to things, I think one of the pieces, the little additional flavors, if you will, that is worth considering is like sensory processing struggles. So
Mhm.
different people, like particularly people who are like neurodiverse, can struggle with different sensory processing issues. So maybe auditory processing is not the best. So you want to try more of the kinesthetic processing, more hands-on. So that having different ways of doing it can be helpful in that way.
That's really fascinating. Okay, so I am the partner of a tradie, let's say, and I can
Mm-hmm.
see some of the things that we've spoken about today. How do I support somebody in my business, whether it be my partner or one of my team? How do I support them with their journey? What should be some of the things that
Yeah.
I do to proactively support?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you do is you encourage them to do a program
Yeah.
like this because it's really good for self-confidence, to be honest. And we'll talk about partners in a second, but I will say a lot of the time when I'm working with people, it's about giving them the confidence to know that they can manage their ADHD. It's hugely important, and there is nothing like it. It's one of the reasons I love running a group program, because people will see other people, other tradies talking about the struggles they have, and they'll feel not alone, and they'll understand that they have strengths and weaknesses.
Mhm.
But if you are a partner and you're thinking about how to support them, the biggest way to do that is probably going to be to understand that working memory, time blindness struggles that they have. And it can be helpful to have someone else there who is capturing information, who is sort of running the background executive support, so that they can go and use their strengths more effectively. But it takes a special kind of person to do that because, not every partner is cut out to be, in that administrative space. In fact, a lot of partners are also neurodiverse themselves. And so this is one of the reasons why I always personally in our program, we always start with helping the person so that they can then support their partner and the partners can support them. And it's a lot more like give and take.
Mm. How much of this comes down to the just not understanding the condition I've been diagnosed with or how to work with it?
A lot of it comes down to that, but it's hard to understand because if you typed it into ChatGPT, for example, you will not get help, unfortunately. And the reason is because you really have to dig through the research. A lot of the research is designed to help people who are prescribing medication, to help people who are working with kids. You really do have to dig through. And I'm lucky enough to have a research team who help with that, to be able to go through and say, okay, this is a paper that says something that technically, you know, for example, last week I was looking at a paper about ADHD connected to entrepreneurship, and the paper was labeled psychiatric mental health problems connected to, entrepreneurship and the negative outcomes of it. And they had a whole bunch of negative things in ADHD. And so you have to be able to go through those papers, understand what they mean, understand if they're valid, and then combine them with a whole bunch of other pieces. Or you can just work with me. Those are kind of the different problems.
There are a lot of similarities because I understand there's a bit of a spectrum and everybody's very different
Mhm.
on, well, in my experience at least. And are there a lot of markers that are quite similar in each person with ADHD?
Markers, genetic markers or?
No, I think more like behavioral markers.
Mm.
Are there ways that this manifests in sufferers that is similar with each person, or is it really vastly different for everybody?
No, there are a lot of similarities. It's not all exactly the same. People are different, but when you're getting diagnosed, that is how they are testing. They're looking at, do you, struggle to sit down in spaces where you're supposed to sit down? Do you feel like you're being driven by a motor? Do you tend to get distracted? Like these are the things, and if you have to have a certain amount of them and a couple of other pieces, that means that you have the diagnosis. So yes, it is similar.
Fantastic. I've found in my experience that it's just so different for everybody. And I wonder just how much of it, when I'm thinking about it broadly in a practical sense, I wonder if my experience of them externally is because some of the people I work with have found a structure that works for them, and others are still feeling very chaotic and unsure of what they're going
Mm-hmm.
through. So many of them, I can just thinking about some conversations I've had in the last week or two. They're totally confused by who they are or how they show up. They don't understand
Mm-hmm.
themselves,
Yeah.
presumably because they see others and feel like that's the way they're meant to show up instead of
Mm-hmm.
understanding that they have a difference.
100%. It can be so tough because the world is not designed for people who have ADHD. That's not the majority. And as a result, you will get a lot of strategies. People will say, just get started. You'll feel way better once you're started, which is not helpful if you have a working memory problem. Or people will say, just write it down, but that doesn't work if you're then going to lose the piece of paper. So these are all pieces that need to be done. And it's one of the reasons why even with what we do, we have a coaching program, but it's not like you're just getting thrown in to, learn independently because that's not going to work. So there has to be a lot of like personalization and community support and one-on-one strategies and, all kinds of different pieces that have been designed because your brain works differently. So when you have ADHD, everything is different. And so people can be on very different ends of the spectrum. Like people can be total chaos, Or they can be working really well, but burning out, like knowing this has a finite, limit. Or they can be kind of somewhere in the middle.
Mm. It must be very confusing for you and other professionals to figure out frameworks that work for so many people en masse. When you're talking about a group program,
Mhm.
I can imagine it must have taken a lot of research and a lot of testing to find ways that work for
Mhm.
all, given that there is such a broad spectrum of how this manifests in people. Sky, what
Yeah.
do you wish people like me knew or understood about ADHD?
It's a great question. I think maybe the biggest one, and this might not relate specifically to you, but I think it's important to know that people who have ADHD are probably maxed out on trying harder. This is something that often comes up, they just need to try harder. The truth is they're probably trying about as hard as they can to their level, and the system is wrong. So it's, have you ever been told to try harder on something and you're like, no, you don't get it. It's just broken or it's not working properly. And you get really, really frustrated. You're like, it doesn't turn this way. Stop trying to tell me to turn it. And so, that can be the experience of somebody who has ADHD.
Wow. Okay. That must be very frustrating. I can only begin. Guy, I have found this really eye-opening and actually very interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to our chat today that would love to find out more about your program and how it is that you help.
hmm
Where can people find you?
Yeah, so go ahead if you want to talk to me. The best place to talk to me is on Instagram at Unconventional Organization. You can DM me Tradie, and we'll give you the 2-minute focus formula so you can get started. I also have a website, Unconventional Organization, and a podcast, the ADHD Skills Lab. So if you want to go there and check out the articles and the podcast and all the free support there for business owners with ADHD, then yeah, you're welcome to.
Fabulous, Guy. Thank you. I'll make sure all of that is in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, just scroll down. You'll find all of the links there so you can reach out to Sky and say g'day. Sky, thank you so much for joining us today. That was absolutely fascinating chat.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You've been listening to Tradies in Business podcast with Nicole Cox. Find out more about today's guest, tools for your trade business, and other cool stuff at tradiesinbusiness.com.au.